we are pushing live, and I'm going to hand host over to Seth. I'm so excited. Oh, I see some familiar people who have been in a couple of sessions. Thank you for joining us again. Ooh. The scary moment happened when I had to hear myself twice because it went through to YouTube and into my ears. All right, Seth, you are officially host.
All righty.
All right, so we're going to kick off right at 11 and get going. But I'm so excited about today because I spend every Tuesday evening with the wonderful lady who is about to speak with us. She is at Refine Labs, and they have a demand gen live session that everyone is welcome to come join, and it is run very similarly to this. In fact, it's quite the inspiration for what we've been doing this week with a lot of Q&A going on and a less polished, formalized like webinar style. So I feel like it's been successful. I'd love to hear your feedback. As you're joining, please feel free to introduce yourself, drop a link to your newsletter if you have one. Today's session is unique in that we're talking about newsletters that go to customers and kind of thinking about how we can use that as a touch point with them to grow their success, grow their affinity for our brand or whoever is sending this newsletter. And it's right at 11. So I'm going to make that announcement one more time. I pushed this live to YouTube. We are in Zoom meeting mode for this session to facilitate some intimacy, have a conversation, get the Q&A going. We're joined by Megan Bowen. I am going to do a few housekeeping announcements and then hand it over to her. So we have a Slack community. Seth is about to drop the link to that. That has been on fire during this newsletter fest. It is an event Slack that we hope will live on long after the event and help you connect with fellow newsletter creators. There are a couple of cool channels in there where you can drop your latest issue link, where you can ask questions, where you can grab resources, and where you can list jobs if you have newsletter jobs. We also have 2 contests going on this week. One is for a free year of Curated. We only have 2 entries right now, and we can have 3 winners. So go grab a spot and get some people voting for you. It really just involves signing up for the free trial or free account, and then building out a mock-up of what your newsletter would look like. So super excited about that. We also have a contest going on right now for newsletters of the year. We had some great newsletters nominated by the crowd, and they're in different categories. So go and vote for those. And that's about it on my end. Now I get to move over to talking about Megan. And I told her I was going to let her really introduce herself because I tend to fumble someone's introduction. But I did tell Seth that Megan has a podcast that is wonderful. It's called the Unwritten Playbook. And I want him to drop the link to that in before she gets going. And you guys, that is a great podcast to listen to if you need some inspiration in your life. And she has some great business journeys that she shares, and the people she interviews tend to yield some interesting insights from their own experiences. So without further ado, welcome, Megan. Take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Seth. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day. Really appreciate you joining the session. Just to give you guys a little bit of background, my name is Megan Bowen. I have been in the B2B tech SaaS startup space in New York City for the entirety of my 17-year career. I actually started at an ed tech company called eChalk right out of college and was an account manager for almost 7 years. And so that's where I really fell in love with the account management, customer success function, and everything that's involved with that. After that, I went to ZocDoc, early days, started as a customer support agent, but built out their post-sale team. I then went to Grubhub and Seamless, focused on building out the account management function for the B2B side of the business, which was a great run. I was there for the IPO, which was really exciting. Went back to a small startup after 4 years there called Managed by Q, where I started as the head of account management, but I ended up as the chief operating officer, running all go-to-market teams, marketing, sales, success, and operations. Really learned a lot about the entire customer journey there, and was great to expand my scope and really learn more about all of those other functions and everything that goes into a customer journey. Customer success is definitely my passion, but after Managed by Q, I had a short stint at Platters as the VP of Customer Success, another food company. The pandemic unfortunately impacted that business. And so last summer, I joined Chris Walker at Refine Labs as their COO, Chief Customer Officer. So we help companies with their demand generation programs at Refine Labs. And my role is really internal company operations and really designing our service delivery to ensure that we're driving successful outcomes for our customers. So given my background in customer success, that's really what inspired the main topic for this session today. I'm sure a lot of your other sessions are around how you can use newsletters to really acquire new customers and build your brand and drive awareness in the market, which is clearly a key goal for this type of strategy. What I found in my experience is every company that I worked for had a customer newsletter, and so I've seen a lot of things that didn't work well, and have also seen what does work. And so what I hope to share in this particular session today is really what I believe are sort of the biggest problems and mistakes that are very, very common when companies attempt to spin up and distribute a customer-centric newsletter, and how I think about designing and executing a strategy for a customer newsletter that will actually be effective and drive the outcomes that you want. With customers, really what we're always thinking about is how can we retain those customers? How can we make them successful? How can we turn them into advocates that might refer new customers through word of mouth? Or how can we get them to that point where they want to invest even more and expand their services with the particular company? Retaining and growing your customer base and creating advocates, I would argue, is one of the key things that you can do to really build your brand, build a successful company, increase revenue. And so, of course, any newsletters that are geared towards prospects are equally as important, but I think you need to think about customer newsletters a little bit differently. So I'll jump in. I'm going to go through sort of those mistakes that I mentioned, and then we'll break down my strategy and how I think about it. We'll take about 20 minutes or so, and then I would love to open it up to the Q&A. And so feel free to drop your questions as I'm chatting so that we can begin to bring you on to ask your question and take them. But I'll go ahead and jump in from there. So the four biggest issues that I've seen really over the course of my career that have been fairly consistent when I've seen different companies deploy, their version of the customer newsletter. So the first is a lot of stuff is going on with customers. They're often getting potentially automated emails from the product. They're getting contacted by their customer support manager who is trying to move forward with the implementation. You might have other marketing nurturing streams for your customer, whether it's in the onboarding process or otherwise that they're receiving. And very often I find that whomever is in charge of the customer newsletter will decide that they want to send it out, but they're not thinking broadly about the entire customer journey. They're making decisions about when it should be sent, how often, and what information should be included without really getting the full scope of what the customer is experiencing from all of the different stakeholders in the company. And that can cause a lot of problems. It can create too much communication, which creates noise, and then nobody actually reads it. or they could be getting messages at not the right time based on where they are in the process. And so we'll talk about how to address that. The next problem I see is a lot of companies that I've worked at or that I've spoken with say, well, of course we need a newsletter for our customers. And they're like, well, we'll send one every week, every month, whatever frequency they think makes sense. And really, they're just checking the box. They're not really thinking about it as a strategic initiative that can actually drive business outcomes. And what I often see is it really dilutes the quality of information that's typically in a newsletter. The third problem I see is so often content for newsletters is really designed based on what the company wants to say, what the company wants the customer to do, hey, we just released this feature, like this feature is so cool, it can do all of these things. And they're not really putting themselves in the customer's shoe and designing content that is going to be relevant to the customer. And this is really key. We're going to talk about this because at the end of the day, if your content isn't relevant and compelling to the audience you're trying to reach, they're not going to read it. And it's not going to have the intended impact that you want. And then the last point that I'll make is, unfortunately, of course, with the exception of your newsletter, Ashley, a lot of newsletters that we get are just not that good. They're uninteresting. There's a lack of creativity. There's a lack of compelling content or storytelling. And the reality is everybody's getting a lot of emails, a lot of messages, scrolling through a lot of social media platforms. And so at the end of the day, like the content that you create needs to be good if you actually want people to consume it. So cool. Those are sort of the four big problems that I think I've really seen across a lot of different companies and that I think really contribute to customer newsletters not actually having the intended impact that people hope that they do. When we think about the purpose of a customer newsletter, I would say broadly that most people, most companies would agree that the goal is really to, inform and educate customers on important things that will really enable them to leverage whatever your product or service is to drive the outcome that they were hoping to achieve when they started to work with your company to begin with. A customer will decide to buy a product or buy a service ultimately because they hope to achieve some goal. Either you're saving them money, saving them time, solving a problem, improving the experience of a particular aspect of their role, whatever it may be. And so it's important to remember that every time you're going to communicate with your customer, you need to tie it back to that because that's why they're working with you. And that's why they're here. And so it's always important to really keep that in mind. And as long as you're able to think about it through that lens, I think it's the right North Star that will keep you true to creating a content and a cadence that will be well received by your customer. And if you do this right, the newsletter is a strategic initiative for you to retain your customer revenue, for you to make customers aware of additional things they can purchase from your company to solve additional problems, create advocates that could generate word of mouth referrals, right? Which are things that everybody wants. So let's break down the overall strategy for developing a successful customer newsletter. So I like to really break this down into four key components. So I'll just at a high level start by talking you through each of the four components at a high level, and then we'll break each one down in more detail. So the first is you have to audit and document your existing customer journey and all of the communication touch points that already exist. This is a key step. Most people have tunnel vision. They think about the thing that they're doing and not how it will interact with everything else that is going on with the customer or at the company. And so we'll talk more about how to think about that, but really auditing and documenting the customer journey. The next is you need to identify themes, trends, topics of information that your customers actually care about. This is easier said than done, but you really need to think about what content are you actually going to be putting into this newsletter. And we'll talk about some tactics that you can use to really uncover what those are. The next is you need to design a strategy that makes sense for your company and for your customers. And that strategy, you need to think about what is the cadence, what is the content, what is the purpose. So you really need to be thoughtful and not just write and send out a newsletter. It needs to be part of a broader strategy that you've thought through. And lastly, you need to get creative and execute effectively. You need to stand out from the crowd, do things that other people are not doing, be compelling and relevant. And then you need to actually execute well and consistently. A newsletter, as we know, is not a one-time thing. So it does require a commitment to ongoing effective execution. So let's go back to that first one and break that down a little bit more. We'll break each of these 4 components down. And then within probably about 10 minutes or so, we should be able to open it up for questions. So jot down your questions as you have them. As I get into the details here, really excited to get to that portion of the session. So step 1 was auditing and documenting your existing customer journey. And so what I like to do is really think about everything that the buyer is going to experience. So this includes before they're even ever a customer, they're going to be seeing potentially your ads on social media or something on LinkedIn, right? What marketing activities are driving different communications to your potential customers? What are they? What are the messages that are being said? At some point, your customer is going to enter a sales process. They're going to talk to a sales rep. They're going to go through whatever sales process you have at your company. When they sign, they'll then go through an onboarding process, right? They're going to meet their CSM. There might be some initial automatic communication that's sent out through the product or your marketing automation system. Many people have onboarding email nurtures, et cetera. Then you have your CSM, right? They're intending to build a long-term relationship with this customer. They're going to have some type of meeting cadence. They're going to reach out to that customer at a specific frequency or to check in on certain things. Every company's journey for their customer is different. There's a different set of activities depending on your product or service. So the goal here is just map out what is true today and what exists. Very often you're going to find out that your prospect and then your customer is typically bombarded with a lot of messages. And so the point of this is to really understand what's being communicated and when, so that you can be smart about how you're going to actually strategize about where your newsletter fits into this mix. I think it's really important to understand what automated product emails might be sent, or what messages might be surfaced within a product through app queues or some other tool, because that also counts as communication. A lot of people have NPS surveys that pop up in the product as well. I think the other piece of it is, as you're documenting this journey, you need to document it as if you are the customer. Put yourself in the customer's shoes. These are the messages I'm receiving over the course of my experience with this company. How am I feeling about that? Is what they're communicating to me clear? Is it relevant to me? Is it compelling? Is it actually helping me achieve this goal that I hoped to achieve with them? Very often this can just be a simple document or outline, but that's a key component of this process that I highly recommend everybody goes through. It's very common for people to over communicate. So sometimes after doing this, you might actually make some decisions to say, you know what, maybe we don't need to send this, or maybe our six email nurture onboarding stream is not needed anymore. We can reduce that to 1 email and have the CSM do their normal implementation process. So this can actually have some great side effects and takeaways of how you might be able to streamline any communication once you go through that audit and documentation. So now that you have a lay of the land, you know what's happening. Now, the next step is to really think about, what do your customers actually care about consuming? What do they want to read about? What will make them open that newsletter and actually consume and read the information? And so here, this is really about identifying those common themes, trends, topics of information that customers care about and they want to know. And so step one is customer interviews. If you're a marketer, you're in charge of the customer newsletter, you should have access to customers. So whether you're, tagging along to a meeting with the CSM or reaching out on your own, get in front of 10 to 20 customers and talk to them about what they care about. Why did they decide to buy your product or service? What goals are they trying to achieve? What outcomes are they trying to deliver? What information gaps exist that can be helpful to them? Even directly asking what information would be interesting for them to receive in a newsletter, right? Ask all of those questions and really take the time to do those customer interviews. You will always learn a ton of information. You may not learn what you would think you'll learn, but you'll always learn really, really valuable key takeaways. Then there are other things that are very typically included in newsletters that do make sense. And so you really want to think about, we have product and feature updates and we want to let people know about them, right? Because if they don't know about them, they might not actually use them to their benefit. We might have some customer success stories or testimonials that provide a really clear path of how that customer can be successful using that product or service. There could be very actionable tactics or tips that the customer might be able to implement in order to get the maximum benefit of the product or service that you have. And so the goal is to really, through customer interviews and research, as well as making your own list of things that you believe will be interesting and relevant to your customer, it's really making a list of all of these potential themes and topics that you would include. Once you have that list, then you need to put yourself in your customer's shoes. It's about them. It's not about you. And so that's why that customer research step really is key and important. And this is where you should go through and really say, okay, if I talk about this feature, the customer actually probably doesn't care. What they care about is what this feature will solve. So let me reframe that update in a way that will speak to them in their language about a pain point that they have and how they might be able to solve that. A success story about, hey, this customer loves our company. They just love it so much. Like, yay, yay, yay. Very fluffy often the time. Why don't you actually break down exactly what that other customer did in order to achieve a specific outcome so that another customer could actually take that information, apply it to their context, and have similar success, right? And so it all comes back to putting yourself in their shoes, thinking about them, creating content that is relevant to them that they actually care about and can action on. So the third step is really designing the strategy. What is your newsletter strategy? And so we've talked a bit already about, at the end of the day, your goal is really around customer success, retention, growth, advocacy, all good stuff. Knowing that that's your goal, what is your strategy to achieve that goal? So the first is you have to decide what your cadence will be. Sometimes, we have to do it weekly. We have to do it monthly. We have to do it quarterly. You don't have to do anything, right? You can decide. And I would say always choose quality over quantity. I've had different companies that I've worked at where we've done monthly. I've had some companies where we've done quarterly. I've seen weekly, and that can make sense sometimes. Typically from a customer perspective, they're already getting a ton of messages. So more often I would lean to a monthly or a quarterly newsletter cadence, but really you have to make that decision. But what should go into that decision is how many other communications are they receiving? We don't want it to turn into noise. And what cadence can I support putting out really quality content? So you might say, I'd love to do it monthly, but we have a really small team. And honestly, we're probably not going to be able to put out a quality newsletter unless we do a quarterly cadence. Totally fine. I think take all of those constraints and factors into play and make a decision that makes sense for your company. The next is really think about what you're going to include. So you've done your research, you've listed out your topics, and you really want to create a format that is compelling and relevant, right? And you really want to make sure that you're including actionable, relevant, compelling content that is going to help them be successful. Customers are also at different stages of their journey. And so this is another important consideration in your strategy. You might send out your Q1 newsletter, and your customer that started yesterday and your customer that's been with you a year might be getting the same thing, right? So are there different newsletters for different cohorts, or are you able to understand that that's the case and create different sections within your newsletter that might speak to customers that are at different parts of their journey? These are the types of things to consider as you're mapping out that strategy. And really going back to that customer journey document that you made and really understanding how your newsletter is actually adding value to that journey and not just creating additional noise. Again, so every company is going to have that different context, but these are just some of the core principles that you need to keep in mind and evaluate for yourself using your own judgment and common sense to design the strategy that works best for you. Certainly, once you start sending them out, figuring out an opportunity to get feedback directly from your customers is another key way to continue to refine that strategy over time. Ask them if they read it, what they read, what they like, what they don't like, and take that feedback to fuel ongoing improvements and iteration to your newsletter. So lastly, the last is really getting creative and executing efficiently. So I feel like more often than not, newsletters are really different sections of text, describing different things, providing information, maybe some screenshots or imagery here and there. And that has its place. And text obviously should be a component of the newsletter. But I think that there's just so much more opportunity for creativity now. And I think a newsletter is a great way to figure out how you can infuse that creativity in there. Are you able to embed some video clips? Are you able to include any surveys? Are you able to include any interactive tools or resources that may be beneficial to that customer, again, in order to help them get the outcome that they wanted by working with you in the first place? And so I would really encourage everyone to not just, say, okay, let me write up all my topics and sections for my newsletter and send it out, but how can you do something that's meaningfully different? Is your newsletter actually not an email at all? And is it a quarterly event where you're doing a live newsletter? Who knows? You can get so creative and think about things that have never been done before. This is how you're actually going to stand out. Another thing is, I feel like you're starting to see this trend. People talk a lot about how B2B should be more like B2C, and that's how you should advertise. A newsletter is really, it's a format and an opportunity to tell a story. So how can you tell stories? How can you evoke emotion? How can you entertain? Right now, those are the types of things that really pull people in. And then layer on, how can I educate and inform and help and provide resources to drive those outcomes? And again, so every company is different. Your resources will be different. But what I encourage you to do is not just say, all right, I'm going to kind of make a newsletter based on all the newsletters I've seen before. How can you create something that is different and that stands out? Because that's how you're going to actually get people to consume what you're creating. And then last point on execution is, as you're thinking about all these things, your strategy, your cadence, how creative you want to be with your format, a newsletter, as we know, is not a one-time thing. So whether you do it weekly, monthly, quarterly, there is a cadence, and you need to execute well. So don't be that company that puts everything into an amazing first newsletter and then you're like, oh my God, I got to do this again. Figure out your strategy and set yourself up for success to actually execute well consistently. Because your first, not just your first newsletter needs to be awesome. They all need to be awesome. And so consider that and make sure that as you're making decisions on cadence and format and content, that you're designing it in a way that you're going to be able to consistently meet a high bar of quality and execute well over time. So that was a lot of talking. I'll pause there. That sort of breaks down those common mistakes and the way I think about thinking about how to actually execute a customer newsletter effectively. So I would love to kind of move to the interactive portion of the session.
Yay. We have Emma ready to come on and ask her questions. So.
Awesome.
Hi, I'll put my camera on so I'm not being rude. Sorry, I have three screens here, so I'm trying to like not look at the screen. So I'll try and like make it as best as possible. I just had a question. Thank you for that. That was great. Like I really appreciate that, Megan. Oh, sorry if it's Megan. I just wanted to say, I wanted to know if there's any advice, kind of we're a publisher in Ireland, and I just wanted to know, we have a paid premium product, and a lot of what you're saying is really relevant to us, actually. So yeah, we have this product, and I guess we have a newsletter that goes out, but we don't actually have a specific newsletter for our subscribers, as it were. So I guess one issue we're seeing is that we have this churn, I guess, of subscribers who are paying for our paid premium product, but they're not using their subscription as best as possible. They may not be accessing, whether it's the app or the products itself, and reading online. And I just wonder if there's any sort of advice there for, publishers who are creating newsletters that are just for their customers in a way, and yeah, if there's anything that can be done in that sort of aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And so I think if I'm hearing you correctly, you have a cohort of sort of paying subscribers that aren't utilizing your product or service as yes. you want them to, in order for them to really yes. get the benefit. Therefore, definitely. They will eventually cancel. And just like with a lot of these things, in order for a customer to get a true benefit, they often have to take action. They have to do stuff, right? They have to commit to a level of time and investment. And so there's really two ways to go about this. A lot of, whether it's product announcements or newsletters that go out, it's about, here's how to use our product, or this is why we think this feature is great. And, our product just was updated to do this. And, you all have been asking for this feature. So great news, this exists. What you need to do is you need to meet your customer where they're at and make it extremely easy for them to take the actions that you want them to take. And you need to reframe your language within the context that they're in. And so whatever your product or service is and whatever you need them to do, whatever action you need them to take, it needs to be more like, in order for you to get this benefit, or in order for you to get the most of this subscription, or for you to realize this particular value, this is what other customers are doing in order to maximize that. And here's clear, easy instruction for how to do that so that you can get this value. So it's really, people are not just going to use your product because you tell them how to use it, or you tell them something new's been released. You have to bring it back to why they decided to buy in the first place. There might be an opportunity as well for you to speak with customers that have recently churned and ask them why they canceled the subscription. What made you cancel the subscription? Why didn't you use the product? That could give you some really interesting insight that could either fuel product improvements that are needed, or maybe information gaps that existed. How often you have those conversations and they're like, oh, well, I didn't really get this value that I thought I would get, so I just canceled. And then it was like, oh, well, did you know you could get that value if you do this? And it's like, oh, I didn't know that. If I did, like, that's easy to do, right? That stuff happens all of the time. So those like interviews of churn customers can give you some great insights for how you might be able to communicate and message in a way that's going to actually resonate with your actual customer.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Thank you. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Yeah, cool. Thank you. That really answers everything. Yeah, I think you made some good points and when you were describing before, just about like customer testimonials and things like that, because we do have surveys and we actually have gone physically to people's houses to ask them about the premium products that they like, and what articles that they specifically like. And I mean, it hasn't come, and I've just thought, with newsletters, there's such an opportunity there, to give people the curated content that they might be looking for, but also like educating as well. So yeah, I think there's some really good stuff there. Thank you
for that. Yeah, thank you, Emma. Great question.
Thank you.
This reminds me of talking with Eric Barnes yesterday of the Daily Memphian, and they are an online-only newspaper, and they have like 20 newsletters because they have different like genre within the newspaper newsletters, right? And that's a big way that they grow paid subscriptions is through the free newsletter. And he talked about like how they envisioned it was that you would click on the link in the newsletter, it would take you to the site, and then you explore within the site from there. But that people weren't doing that. They were exploring, they would go back to the newsletter after each article they viewed, right? And then he discussed, which I thought was pretty brilliant, that they figured out that having customer success for their audience, who is sometimes older or less tech savvy, like be really, really accessible was the key to getting people like to growing their list and growing subscribers. It was having someone who was willing to spend 20 minutes explaining how to do a thing. And now I'm thinking, oh, they need to capture what they're learning from those sessions where they're intimately helping people and put together a newsletter about how to like get the most out of their subscription.
Absolutely. Yeah. And again, and it's we want them to get the most out of their subscription, but in their language, we want you to get the value that you believed that you would get by deciding to purchase this from the beginning, right? And it's always reframing it in their words, which we all believe that, but it's very easy when you're actually executing to come at it from where you're at instead of where they're at.
One powerful thing that he said was that their problems they're not their problems, they're our problems.
I love that.
We are not teaching them well enough if they have that problem.
Yes.
Right. All right. So we have a question from Sean. Sean, give me, I feel like I asked your question for you yesterday. Nod yes or no, whether you want me to bring you on or you want me to ask it. No, he gives me he's doing this. It's like a basketball move or something. Okay. So he says, you mentioned creating a newsletter for customers that are in different parts of their journey. How often do you see companies put that into practice? I can see it being a nurturing process. The pause would be the cadence. I'd want to make sure that it's always bringing value.
Definitely. And so it can be difficult to create multiple newsletters for different cohorts of customers. And when we think about designing like a scalable strategy that you can consistently execute on, the way that I've typically seen a newsletter strategy adjusted to accommodate for this is it's really common that in what I would call maybe like the onboarding phase, that the customer is getting a lot of information. So is that 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months? It's going to depend on the product or service. That's when the CSM is going to be most active. They will have just gotten through a sales process. That's where you're going to see most typically any customer nurture streams are happening in the first like 90 to 180 days of a customer journey. And so one thing that I've done before is I basically said, I'm only going to send the newsletter to customers that have been with us for at least 3 months or at least 6 months, right? So you could have some type of like line in the sand where this is the onboarding period, and I'm going to treat this period very differently for customers. I believe that what happens in the first like 30 to 90 days sets the tone for the lifetime of that customer, right? If they don't get off to a good start, if they don't truly adopt or implement in a way that they should within that time period, it's unlikely that they're ever going to catch up. And they'll likely eventually churn at some point. And so you're not going to necessarily get that outcome by just sending a newsletter to everyone, right? That really requires a thoughtful onboarding process from the CSM, building a relationship, typically achieving some very specific milestones based on your product or service, like activating their account, getting them in there, actually having them log in and use it, setting things up, their profile, whatever it is. So that's how I've handled it. I basically created a milestone and will exclude any customers that are within that onboarding phase so that I can really focus the newsletter content on people that are sort of past that phase and within the usage of that. And then I typically I don't love like automated nurture streams for new customers, unless you're some type of B2C company, or you could be a B2B company that has a very low cost offering and relies on a lot of users. Email is a great strategy for that. So most of my companies have been in the B2B side with like the larger contract values where that really makes sense to do. So I hope that answers your question, Sean. Happy to take a follow-up or let me know if I didn't answer that.
Somewhat of a follow-up to that, because we have several brands within Simple Focus that are in that lower cost realm. Mm-hmm. And I've been considering, I've seen some onboarding messaging from other brands when I sign up for software that one that I thought was particularly brilliant was like, instead of me getting 7 messages like over 14 days telling me to go turn on this or do this, it was basically like a checklist of things I needed to do with links to the help docs for those things. And so I don't know, like some were more advanced and they monitor that within the software and you've kind of got a progress bar, but even without a progress bar, a checklist is great. And so for brands that we don't have onboarding nurtures for, but we do have newsletters that go out, like say Opt-in Weekly goes out once a week, but it's doing like some heavy lifting. It's going to prospects, it's going to customers. Mm-hmm. It's intended to just have a curated news bit in there. And I've considered like, hey, like short little section, new to Curated, here are some things you can do to see it work better for you or something like that. And then like link to that checklist somewhere else kind of thing. So I'm curious about that heavy lifting and potentially like recurring sections of newsletters that would then accommodate those who are onboarding and those who are 4 or 5 months in, that doesn't detract from the person who is 4 months in and is like, I don't need that checklist, but they just kind of see it and know it's going to be there. Yeah. While it's valuable to the person who's like, oh, here's the newsletter. And like, this is a reminder.
I think that's a great strategy, especially for your audience and what you're trying to achieve. And so I love that, whether it's like, the top right or at the bottom, you have some evergreen section, maybe with links for the new people or any other resources that make sense to have available, where other sections and components of the newsletter are refreshed every time it goes out. So I think that's really smart. I'm definitely a list person, so I love checklists as well. And so I think that's a great strategy. I love that, Ashley.
Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to ask Sandra's question for her. And this one's interesting. How effective are audio versions of a newsletter? I want to embed an audio version of my newsletter within the written newsletter.
For that is a great question. And so it's been interesting because I think, I would say that right now, video and audio content, I think, is probably being consumed at like an all-time high. I think with like the whole pandemic and us working at home, our context has really changed, right? Like we're not driving a car and listening to our radio, or we're not on a subway with a bunch of other people and like playing stuff on our phone, right? And we're typically at home, right? And that is how a lot of content is being consumed. So I think that right now, that's actually a really new and creative idea to test out and to see if people are actually, clicking play and listening to whatever it is that you're sending. I think that's a great example of kind of the last point that I was trying to make of do something different. I haven't really seen that in newsletters that I've received. And so I would say test it out, try it a few times, reach out and get some feedback from customers of if they listened to it and if they liked it. I think that I think that falls into a great idea to try category.
Yeah. So I think what you could do if you're a curated user on this call would be to launch a podcast through like Anchor or something, and then grab the link from that and use that in a section that you titled like podcast version or audio version of your newsletter so that people could click, and then you'd kind of be doing double duty because you'd have a podcast, but you'd just be reading the newsletter that's below and kind of doing commentary on it, which I've seen a few that do that. And it's actually quite interesting because you have this new option, right? When you open the email to either listen to the writer or the team's commentary or to scroll through and review. So kind of giving people different choices of how they want to consume your content. I'm looking to see if some of these LOLs have questions in there in the chat.
Sandra had a follow-up to that question.
Okay.
If Megan could recommend any audio software for doing something like that.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna, I'll answer that, and I was gonna expand on your point, Ashley, about leveraging a podcast you may have started, right? I think, and your point on having multiple formats for the same information to kind of let people choose how they want to consume. The other point of this is if you are investing in creating any other meaningful assets for your company, podcasts, videos, anything on your website, anything else, like your newsletter is absolutely an opportunity to reuse that content, repackage that content, send it out. People need to hear the same thing multiple times before they're going to remember it. So I think you brought up a really good point. I wanted to kind of hone in on that because that could be another great way to stay consistent by leveraging other things that are already happening and just incorporating them into the newsletter. From an audio like program perspective, I think like today, you like a lot of the tools that, I use and that we use at our company for our podcasting and for our audio stuff is really just a lot of basic stuff like QuickTime, which is default on a lot of Macs. You can actually create audio recordings really, really easily that are high quality. You can do it with Zoom if you want to keep it simple. Sure, it's great to have like a microphone, a webcam, and there are expensive programs you can buy for that type of thing, but you don't actually need it. And so what I always encourage people to do is use something simple and basic to validate that idea is good and get some reps in. And then over time, if you're really onto something, you can then invest in upgrading any equipment. But I would honestly start with like QuickTime, Zoom. And then you can certainly, there are different Adobe programs that are, designed for that type of thing, but I would start there. Keep it simple, validate that it's working, and then you can upgrade your production quality as you go.
Ian kind of added to the conversation about adding in content for newbies. And he's referring to something that we discovered yesterday during a session. We were doing like a demo on how to use Curated as an agency model. And I demoed something that someone had asked me about recently that I also felt like stupid about. And it was this ability to take the body copy box that has like a triangular corner, like just a few lines, and to stretch the body copy box so that it's not just 4 lines, like it could be as long as you need it to be. And I went like through 1 or 2 months of newsletter creation before I said, like, this is really annoying to our developer. And she was like, well, you just stretch it. Like, and so we have discovered that like it's a simple thing that people don't know how to do, but he's making a great point. Like, did you knows about things that are like very basic things, but people might not know how to do, like recirculating that every so often. Like it's not, what I will say is it's not a one and done. Like me saying in that session or me putting it in one newsletter is not a one and done. Like we should be creating a gallery of did you knows and then like linking to that in every newsletter, but bringing one new thing in, every so often or something. So yeah, absolutely. I love that idea.
Yeah. And just to add to that, like if you zoom out a little bit, really when you think about what you're doing as a company, whether it's from a marketing perspective, sales, success, or newsletter, you probably have like, I don't know, 5 to 10 core messages that you're actually really trying to deliver, right? For them to understand what you're trying to do. And really what you're doing is you are restating those things over and over and over again in different ways based on where they are in their journey. And the repetition is key and important. People don't remember, people are bombarded with things. Nobody remembers things that they read once or that someone told them once. The key with repetition though, is how can you say the same thing over and over and over again, but in different and interesting ways. And by saying them in different ways, people consume and interpret information differently. So 2 different people might, describing how to do something in one way might make total sense to one group of people and might not resonate with another. So that's another really interesting thing to consider. And especially if your newsletter is weekly or monthly, you'll be pumping out a lot of content and a lot of information. So that's a great strategy to keep in mind if you're creating content that frequently, of how you can repackage and reframe some of those key messages.
So one interesting thing that, because I'm not seeing any questions, I'm just going to like riff here.
I think Sean did have a follow-up to his question. Sean, since your mic is set up, are we good to unmute you? All right.
Yay!
All right.
Sean's
asking Sean
on.
to unmute.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your question, Sean.
No worries. One of the follow-ups that I had is one of the differentiators that I try to use for my business is that I'm educating people through the process. I put a focus on small to mid-sized businesses. I've worked with the larger ones and I realized a lot of times they don't care. They just want the end result. Whereas the smaller to mid-sized ones actually want to be able to know more so that they can make more of a conscious choice and a decision. Because they're going to see the results more. So part of, for example, web design, when I do that, I'm educating them on the blocks and the different things so they understand what choices they're making. And I try to express, you don't need to stay with me. My whole point is to get you to the point where you know enough so that if you want to go in a different direction, that you can. Part of that onboarding process is me giving them email sequences where I walk them through those things. Some read it, some don't. And that's where the nurturing and the newsletter and segmenting it might actually come in handy, because then it's like you said, you repeat it back. You kind of give it to them in a different way where it might not have registered then because all they cared about was the website. But once they're done and they get to the point where they have that question of, okay, I have the website, what do I do now? I want to figure out a way to be able to kind of segment it that way, based on where I kind of have a feeling, where I can group them and say, I know this person didn't read any of that stuff. Put them within a newsletter where I know I can kind of repeat that until I see the light bulb and then move them through the process. Because even though it's web design, the next thing that I do is start to work with them on their marketing strategy so that they can get people to their website. The example that I would have is I have a client that said, okay, well, we talked about doing all of these things. I still have people to contact me directly instead of going to the website. And my thing was, well, did you actually ask them to go to the website? I see a lot of stuff that you promote is your product, but you don't actually promote the website. And that's where like having that kind of newsletter where you show them how to be able to do that might actually make sense. So that's more of the follow-up to get details on that.
Yeah, I think that context is super helpful. I think as you were describing that, where my mind immediately went was you essentially have like almost like a mini course of like modules of information that you're trying to get across. And so if I were you, I would think about how can I create maybe some type of, really well-designed, robust guide that actually has everything in one place, but then leverage my newsletter to highlight specific steps with a link back to the full resource, right? And each week you're highlighting a different section or the next step, but people always have the ability to get all of the information. Or how can you maybe think about recording a video or a series of videos that break down what you would put in a written guide in video format, grab a couple 60-second clips to throw and embed in your newsletter, and then link back to either your full video series or different ones, right? And in your evergreen section or your did you know, right? People can always grab the whole guide. But when you invest in some of those high quality long form pieces, whether it's written or video, it's a great opportunity to take, a bunch of little snippets and highlight them at different times, linking back to the same asset that you've created. And so that's, I think, how I would think about it a little bit. And you can be upfront in your onboarding process, like, here's everything you need to know. And then your newsletter serves the strategy of the reminding and the reinforcing and saying that message in a different way and resurfacing that asset to them, consistently and repeatedly. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's that's where my mind went as you were describing your situation, and kind of something that I would consider and think through, and if that would make sense for what you're trying to achieve.
No, that is helpful. I also have like WordPress 101. So when it is a WordPress site, they have the video tutorials that they can look at. So I can pull snippets from that and then link it back over to that and be able to just kind of point them back to it again. So that's right on point of what I was thinking about. Thank you.
Yeah, you're already in that and going in that direction. That's awesome. It sounds like you're thinking about it the right way.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else I will be robbing of their question asking time if I talk? Seth, are there any more that are lurking in there that I don't know about?
Not that I've seen. I think you are good to riff.
Yay. Okay, so Marketer Hire has a Q&A in their newsletter, which I think is kind of genius. And I'm trying to think through how you could apply that to a customer newsletter or a customer/prospect newsletter where you're doing Q&As with your happiest customers. And we're talking about that, that idea of taking something that's worked well for them and helping your customers see that they could use what they're buying from you in the same way. Mm-hmm. So have you seen that executed? Does that fit into your idea of being creative and executing? What are your thoughts on Q&As?
Yeah, I love the idea of Q&A. I haven't seen that. I know of Marketer Hire, but haven't seen their newsletter. So
it's called Raisin Bread.
Oh, smart. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think whenever you have a customer that's able to speak directly to other customers, it's way more powerful than your company speaking to them. And if a customer asks a question, you can pretty much guarantee that a lot of other customers have the same question, right? And so I think having some type of Q&A or interactive format that's really driven by your customers and your community, I think is a fantastic idea. I personally haven't seen that. And so I think that's a great way to kind of stand out from the crowd and be creative.
Awesome. Any more questions from the crowd? We have 4 precious minutes of Megan's time left, if you have them. I'm not seeing any pop up.
This was great. I appreciate those that did ask questions. We can definitely squeeze in one more, but I really appreciate everyone taking the time to come to the session today, and really, really great questions. So it's good to hear from you guys, have you come on live.
It was awesome. I love how clearly organized that was. And I love the presenting style of starting very top level view, then going a little bit deeper, but giving the full list and then going a little bit deeper. And I think I will be adapting my presentation style to be more, I don't even know what the word for that is, like that process.
Structure. Yeah.
Yeah. Or it's immersive almost, like the way you explained things. So top level down, says Sean. Yes, Sean. It now has that new name. So I'm seeing not a question, but thank you so much for a fascinating session. So clear and helpful. I agree. I think everyone does. This has been a great start to day 4 of Newsletter Fest. We have 5 sessions today. So coming up next, let me check my calendar, is 3 key steps to landing more emails in the inbox with Brian Minnick at 12:30 Eastern. Then paid sponsorships are both, what to consider about as you decide to monetize. That's at 2:00 with Jake Schoenberger. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Then we have at 3:00, how to manage your newsletter like a product by Anam Hussain. She was at HubSpot once upon a time. Now she's at Below the Fold and Accio. So don't miss that one. And if it's on your calendar for 4:00, that's my mistake. I just emailed everybody like, hey, I don't know what I was doing. This is at 3, not 4. So hopefully we don't have too many people upset about that. And then we have at 5, advanced link collecting, how to curate like a pro, where we're going to show you how to go find interesting things that your audience might be interested in reading, and then how to automate some curation or the curation process as well. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. Seth, if you don't mind dropping the Slack community link one last time. We'd love to have everyone in this room go in there and chit chat further. I know that I always think of questions 2 days later that I then have to just say, oh man, I should have asked that live. So that would be wonderful if you come join us in Slack. And again, thank you so much, Megan. We are so appreciative of your time and the presentation that you just gave, because I think it was a refreshing, hey, how do we think about our customers differently?
For that. Thank you for having me, Ashley. Thank you, Seth, and great to meet all of you. Enjoy the rest of the Newsletter Fest day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.